Good morning, afternoon or evening, wherever you are. I'm Paul Clark and welcome to my studio. Now, just before we start, for those of you who follow along each week, I would just like to wish you all a very, very happy new year and thank you so much for supporting this channel over the last year. I really do appreciate it. So, what have I got for you lovely lot today? Well, a few weeks back I had a comment left here on YouTube from someone saying, now Paul, each week when you list your materials you say any decent watercolour paper will do, but that's a bit ambiguous. And I say, yeah, that's a good point. So today we're going to have a look at some of the watercolour papers I use, and particularly the difference between using pulp or cellulose-based papers and 100% cotton, and some of the watercolour papers I love to use. So we're going to be having a go at this lovely old galleon with a sunset painted on cotton paper, and this spontaneous watercolour using a pulp cellulose-based paper. So come and join me and we'll paint these both step by step together. So we have already established that there really are two main types of watercolour paper. We have our 100% cotton, which is the most expensive of course, and our cellulose or pulp based papers. But there are also papers which have maybe 25% or 50% cotton and are a mix of both. Now, when I started out watercolour painting many years ago, I probably didn't use cotton paper for the first 5 years of my journey. And I think some of my best work actually has been painted on non-cotton paper. And I can remember the very first time I tried cotton paper, I didn't like it at all. It's a bit like when you drive a new car for the first time. It's not that there's anything wrong with it, it's just that it's different. And I must admit, I found it quite a struggle. But I've grown to love it and I use cotton paper all the time now. Now, I have heard many artists say that you should only use 100% cotton paper. And I disagree with this quite strongly, because if you're starting out, you're just practicing, say, your brush strokes or your colour mixing, why would you use expensive cotton paper? But here's the proviso, and that's why I say any decent watercolour paper will do. If you are using pulp or cellulose papers, then it is important you use a good quality. And believe me, there's a lot of really good cellulose papers out there, as well as some rubbish. And I must stress that I'm not sponsored or affiliated to any paper company at all. All of the papers you see today are ones that I bought with my own pocket money. So let me take you through a few brands that I like to use, starting with the cotton papers. Now, there's this Italian brand, Fabriano Artistico, which is a lovely paper, has a very unique texture to it, takes the water really well, love it a lot. Winsor & Newton make a lovely professional grade. I believe this is also made in Italy, use this a lot. So next we have this German brand, Hahnemuhle. Now, I like this a lot, and I've only recently discovered this. This particular paper is £300, super thick, and it's on a block. Very expensive, but great to use. Next, and probably the most used by professional artists, is Arches. Now, they make a wide range of papers in blocks, pads, loose sheets. Very, very good quality, lovely paper. They have been making paper in the same French village since 1492, and that's the village of Arches, not Arches. If you were to rock up at the village and ask the local, can you show me the way to the Arches factory? They'd probably ask you to leave the country. But this is lovely stuff. Next, but not least, Saunders Waterford, which just might be my favourite by a slight margin over Arches. Beautiful paper made by St Cuthbert's Mill. Again, a wide range of papers from pads, blocks, loose sheets. Exceptional quality, lovely vibrancy to the paper, accepts the water beautifully, love it. Now, I know there are lots of other papers that we don't get so much here in the UK, like Strathmore, Canson, Stonehenge, B, I believe. So please let me know down in the comments what papers you like to use. Always like to learn more. Okay, next let's go on to this cellulose or the pulp based papers, sometimes made from wood pulp. Now, there's probably only one brand that I use here, but there are other good makes. I know Winsor & Newton make a good pulp based paper, De La Rowney's Aquafine range, but the one that I use the most is Bockingford, which I reckon is exceptionally good quality paper. It's also made by St Cuthbert's Mill, who makes Saunders Waterford. I use it all the time. In fact, in a couple of recent tutorials here on YouTube, I use Bockingford. And again, please let me know down in the comments what other papers you like to use. So, enough of me gabbling, let's get on with the tutorials. So here is the photo reference which I got from Pixabay. And my materials on this first exercise, my paper is some Arches, £140. It's on a block so it won't need stretching, but any decent watercolour paper will do. Just 5 colours today: cadmium yellow and orange, alizarin crimson, French ultramarine and Payne's grey, and 4 brushes from my range: a mop, 3/4 inch flat, number 6, and of course my trusty number 3 rigger. Okay, so here is the pencil sketch, and this one is free to download from my website, link in the description below. Off we go, and I'm starting by completely wetting the page with clean water, and cotton papers like this are normally very thirsty, so it takes quite a lot of water to completely soak it. Then straight away, using my flat brush, I'm painting in a mix of cadmium yellow and orange with big broad horizontal strokes. Now I'm painting in the cadmium orange straight into the wet paint. Now this is definitely one of the advantages of using 100% cotton paper, as the cotton fibres will keep the paper wet for probably twice as long as it would if you were using pulp based papers, which is perfect when you're painting large wet in wet washes like this. And because it absorbs the paint so beautifully, it's excellent for smooth graduated blends like this sunset. Next, still using my flat brush, I'm painting in these wispy clouds using a mixture of French ultramarine and alizarin crimson. Now in real time it's probably 5 minutes since I originally wet the paper with clean water, but it's still remaining wet enough to create these lovely soft edges to the clouds. Now you can even wet the paper on both sides, which obviously will keep the paper wet that much longer. Okay, so once that's dried, I'm re-wetting with clean water above the horizon line, but I'm not going all the way to the top. And then just dropping in some cadmium orange along the bottom edge. This is another big advantage of cotton paper. Because it's much tougher than the pulp-based papers, it can take re-wetting several times, no problem at all. And same thing again, when that's dry I'm re-wetting and then dropping in some soft blends into the sea. And I'm using exactly the same colour that I used in the clouds. So just try and keep these brush strokes as flat and as level as possible, because generally sea doesn't tend to go uphill. So now I'm going to be doing a third re-wetting, and of course the paper will be able to handle it. I just feel I've lost some of that lovely orange glow, so in with a nice watery wash of the cadmium orange. Okay, so now it's time to paint the ship, and I'm using the same mixture of French ultramarine and alizarin crimson, but I'm adding in just a touch of Payne's grey to darken it slightly. And I'm now using my number 6 brush. So all of this is really just suggestive detail because I don't really know what all these bits of the ship are, so I'm just sort of blagging it. And I'm using my number 6 brush for all this detail. So in both these demos today I've used a rough textured paper, but equally a cold press will work. Now the texture of the paper really helps in giving natural blends. It also helps in getting that granulation and separation of the paint that I like so much. Now if you look at the clouds above, because I mix the colour, the heavier blue pigment slightly separates and is sinking to the bottom of the textured paper, giving that sort of lovely glowing effect. I'm letting that dry, then I'm painting some washes directly on top, still using my number 6 brush. Now for the reflection in the sea, and I'm using the dry brush technique by keeping my brush flat to the paper and picking up its texture. And it helps to create that illusion of waves and rippling water. And I add in some clean water and drop in some stronger pigment wet in wet. Really nice dark value directly under the ship's hull. And here I'm using cadmium orange just to create a few more subtle wave details. Okay, so now for those tricky masts, which are slightly leaning over due to the swell in the sea. Now they don't have to be perfect and you can leave little gaps for interest, just try and do them as quickly as you can. Just paint with confidence, and remember you can always practice first on some scrap paper. Again, I'm just blagging a lot of this because I'm certainly no ship expert. And of course, to paint the rigging in, we use our rigger. It's what it was designed for. Now, I've often thought, with all these thousands of ropes, how do they know which one to pull? Because I'm sure if it was me, I'd pull the wrong one. I think we need to add in a few seagulls silhouetted against the evening light. Alright, that's enough. There we go, all done on lovely cotton paper in about 2 hours. I know it's 24 now, but this was filmed at the end of 23. Okay, so now on to our pulp base paper. On this second exercise, my paper is a loose sheet of Bockingford rough. It's £250, nice and thick so won't need stretching. My colours are yellow ochre, French ultramarine, burnt umber, burnt sienna and Payne's grey, and just 4 brushes from my range, a mop 3/4 inch flat, number 12 and number 6 round. Okay, so this exercise is going to be one of my spontaneous paintings with no real plan. So I'm just sketching out a rough suggestion of perhaps a water's edge and a bank with just an idea of a tree. Off we go again, and soaking the whole sheet with clean water. Right, using my flat brush, I am literally just chucking in colours here and just seeing what happens, seeing where the paint takes me. So with pulp papers like this, I do find that the paint tends to sit on top of the surface a little bit longer than it does with cotton, but you still get these nice natural blends. So for me, just as important as what the paper is made from, it's its thickness. Now, if you're painting subjects like this, where you're using lots of water and very wet washes, then £140 paper will buckle badly, unless it's either on a block or you stretch it first. Now, as this Bockingford is £250, it's holding up very nicely. And as my board is on a slight angle of 15 degrees, the paint is streaking down and creating these nice rainy cloud effects. So I'm just throwing in lots of colour here into the bank and letting all the colours mix and blend on the paper. So this might be a tree up here. Let's just see what happens. Next, I'm sprinkling in very sparingly some table salt just into the foreground. Now, the effect you get from this, I generally find it works better on pulp papers than it does on cotton. And we'll see what we get as the washes begin to dry. Now you can see that although this isn't cotton paper, it's still wet enough for me to paint in these lovely out of focus fuzzy trees. And I'm using various mixes of burnt umber, Payne's grey and French ultramarine. Just simple blobby shapes to represent distant trees. Next, just simply drying off my brush and lifting out this little highlight of water. And it's still damp, so I'm just painting in these vertical reflections, trying to match the colours above. a little splattering in here with any dark value for some random texture. Some goes into dry washes, some goes into damp, all part of the effect. Now that it's dried, you can see the effect of the salt and also these intentional backruns, both of which I find are easier to achieve on pulp papers. Bit of dry brush and perhaps some splattering later to create the sort of a tree shape here, and any old colours will do. I think it's good sometimes not to work from a photographic reference because you can just make things up. I mean, here I'm just suggesting that this is the edge of the bank. And perhaps some shimmering water, again using the dry brush technique. So I am liking the effect that I've got here with the salt, but I just think it's a little bit too contrasty, so I'm just knocking it back with a watery wash of burnt sienna. So this little backwash or cauliflower I've got here could be a little puddle, so I'm just increasing the contrast either side to help it pop out a little. And these are all things which can just simply evolve when you paint in this spontaneous way. Next, using my number 6 brush, just a few more details on these trees, but really keeping it simple and not overdoing it. Just a bit of extra splatting for good effect. Okay, so next I'm going to do some lifting out, and this time the paper needs to be totally dry, and I'm just using clean water and dabbing out with a tissue. Now for me, this works much better than using cotton paper, as the colour tends to stain the fibre of the cotton more permanently, whereas with this pulp paper it comes off just that little bit easier. I'm just trying to create a sense of light bursting through here, and again you can see it's lifting off quite nicely. And then I'm using my usual trick of smudging some of these hard edges with a damp tissue. So my conclusion on which is the best paper. Now, if I was told I could only use one paper for the rest of my life, of course I'd choose cotton every time. And if you've only been using cotton paper for years, should you swap to pulp? Perhaps not. But I don't think you should dismiss pulp papers, especially if you're a beginner and your budget doesn't stretch. But as I said at the start, it does have to be a good quality brand, and believe me, there is some rubbish out there. So I hope that helps. The important thing is to use whatever paper you're happiest using and what suits your budget, not what you've been told to use. It's definitely possible to produce good work on both types of paper. So just to finish off, I'm using my magic scalpel to scratch out a few little glistening highlights. And we're done, and this one took me about an hour and a half. Yes, and I think this painting can also work well cropped in and put into a portrait format. Well, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did, and you'll give them both a go. Now, I'm not going to leave you with the normal please subscribe rubbish and all that. I'm going to leave you with a little gift. That's a gift of a wonderful YouTube video, not one of mine. Now, some of you may have seen it already before because it's got something like 53 million views and 64,000 comments, but it's a video that whenever I need reminding that the world really is a wonderful place and that we can all come together, whether it's through our art or through music or song and dance, this video does it. And I guarantee if you watch it, it'll put a smile on your face. It's called Where the Hell is Matt, and I'll link it below in the description, but you can just type that in the search and watch it through to the end because it really does explode into a wonderful thing. So again, just to wish you a very happy new year and to thank you all again for your support during the year. Have a great week, and I'll see you again next week for another Watercolour Wednesday.